truth and the way that she spoke so openly about her past. That was such a healing thing. I got to the end of the book and I was like, I don't know who this woman is, but I just want to hug her. I feel like I went on that journey with her. And I called her the next day and I just said, I don't know why you said this to me, but I'm just so touched and I would love to turn it into a movie. And so she asked me a lot of questions. And we just talked about it, and then she called me a couple days later and said, I'm going to give you the option.
What did she ask you? What she wanted to know?
She had a lot of things that she didn't want it to be. Well, it's interesting. I said, why did you send it to me? And she said, well, because I know you're from somewhere. I know you're from Tennessee. And it was really important that it wasn't about, like, white girl problems. And I really told her when I read it, I said, so many people in this world have nothing, and that's what I really responded to. Is that you get to the end of this movie and this woman has nothing. She has no man and no money and no parents and no job, and it's a happy ending. And that's extraordinary in this life. So many people don't know where to turn or what resources are going to lift them up out of their grief or their despair. And I thought that she did this for herself with nothing, and I felt like this.
First you, as Reese and Bruno described, first you want to fiercely protect Cheryl, and in all our cases, and in my case specifically, the devotion of not only her mother, but her memory of her mother. And because it's told through memory, first in this rather segmented way, and then as her healing evolves, more specifically in the larger scenes, communicate with smart. I feel very maternal.
We were worried about you having visions of the Mojave section.
Oh, yeah. This is her first water. She's very method. She believes in continuing roll through crowd.
Reese, the opening scene of the film, and we were staying in an elevated hotel, and then we had to take 2 ski lifts, and then we had to hike for about 30 minutes with all the equipment, including portable toilet that actually nobody used. Ridiculous. But then we had to belay rope ourselves in and walk single file on this tiny precipice. It was really scary. It was usually for Yves Belanger, the DP was harnessed in and hanging off the side of the mountain to get all the shots. And he was extraordinary. Everything I did in this film, he did backwards with a 40-pound camera on his back. So I really was my partner in this dance, and he was my Ginger Rogers. It's just about not having any makeup on my face, like any at all. Like when John Marx says to me, "I want you to have no makeup on your face," I was like, "Yeah, but just, like a little bit." No makeup. I was like, no, but and he said, I just want you to trust me. And so we did I think we did a test, and then we did a couple first days. And it actually, I was never used to being on camera for hours and hours. And he goes for hours without saying cut. He'll change the perspective. It goes on for like 3 or 4 hours. So it was almost like being in a documentary. And I've never had that experience. But for me as an actor, it was almost like every kind of trick that I had in my little actor book that I had since I was 14 years old. I couldn't use any of them, There was no chance to sit down. There was no chance to do a reaction shot. Every time I was trying to be funny, he's like, "Are you trying to be funny?" I'm like, "Yeah, I think it's kind of funny." Don't do that.
Bruno, how helpful is that when you have this dynamic between your director and your actor, particularly when your actor is also producing the film? I can see different kinds.
It was amazing, actually. I mean, I've never, as miraculously, it was my first movie I saw digitally. But it goes beyond the digital drama. I mean, he's a guy who And I think he hasn't always worked like this. I think Dallas was a real revelation for him in terms of how he wanted to work in, and I think it paid off beautifully.
In that the little girl who played young Cheryl, the little girl
And filmmakers and writers. And, you know, I have been amazed. I'd read a lot for other actresses over the years, and I was always amazed at, you know, the lack of, you know, there were roles out there, but the lack of complex leading women at the center of movies. And so that's one of the first things we talked about in the first meeting we had. And so the fact that the first thing Reese sent me was Wild was just like a kind of, it was like a light bulb moment. Like this is the first film that we should make together, and this is the right thing. And it's definitely, you know, a mandate for something for me and for Reese to try
Make
and
films about themselves. So I feel that the vast majority of directors are men, and I don't fault them. You know, I think they tell stories about men because they are men, and that's the narrative they understand. So I think, if anything, we've got to support and encourage more female writers, more female directors, and find programs and ways to nurture them. It's interesting, I find a lot of women, like I'll say to them, do you want to direct? Like they'll be photographers or modern artists or something, and they think, well, I don't know, no one ever asked me. So, and I think that's like a different thing that I think in certain contexts women want to be asked instead of just sort of charging forward and doing it. So if we sort of change that consciousness, maybe we'll have more films, I think. And so there's some great programs that are starting. You know, Warner Brothers is starting to nurture young female directors and support a short film program there at the studio in order to nurture more female directors. So that's great news. That just started last year. Or maybe
Yes, and you asked, like, you know, there should be more speaking roles for women. I was thinking, well, women need to learn to speak more because we just clearly don't talk enough. that's what my takeaway. But, you know, the women who inspired me as an actor, who were playing the most extraordinary, complicated, flawed, beautiful humans in film, existed in the 30s and the 40s, and then again in the 70s, and some of our greatest producers who made incredibly politically subversive films in the 70s are women and actresses. And so it seems cyclic versus a new idea. But how it will sustain, to me, is the big question. Why is it cyclic? Because men in movies isn't cyclic. So how is it that we sustain the support for women to be heard and be considered as producers who tell human stories versus, oh, that's great, there'll be more women producers and then we'll get women's movies. It's just hopefully blurring the lines more and more to have more wonderful content and more great filmmakers.
Critical success. I think you have to make a film to exist in its own world. And there's a lot of people who read the book. I mean, I'm curious. What do you read the book? Yeah, lots, you know. And it's so funny. What I've experienced, I don't know if it's true for people, is that once people have seen the movie, they've gone and read the book because I think they're so fascinated by her words and her story. But yeah, I think they have to exist on their own. But I think, you know, hopefully one day.
I miss Monster. I do. And after the first couple weeks were horrible. I hated Monster. I kick it every time. I would take it off my back every single time after we pizza cut. And then after 5 weeks, I just got so used to it. It was like an appendage. And you know what's funny is Cheryl still has Monster in her basement. And the reason Monster is an exact replica of her actual backpack is because she still has it. She still has all of her camping gear and all of her cooking equipment and all of the outfits she wore.
Congratulations.